Imagine you're about to buy a car, a brand new top-of-the-line model that promises speed, comfort, and, the latest safety tech. You and the seller have almost signed the paperwork. Then at the last second, you walk away and buy a different car. Months later, because of breakdowns and budget headaches, you start calling the first seller again. That's essentially what happened with Turkey and a massive high-speed rail deal. A near-final multi-billion-euro agreement with Chinese builders was suddenly abandoned. Turkey handed the project to European companies like Siemens, but implementation ran into technical snags, financing gaps, and delays. Now Ankara is back at the negotiating table with Beijing. Why does this matter? Two reasons. First, China runs the biggest high-speed rail network on Earth, roughly 48,000 kilometers. So its technology, money, and lessons matter at scale. Second, Turkey sits on a crucial east-west bridge for freight and energy. Upgrading its rail network can reshape trade routes from China to Europe and bring in vital foreign currency. So our story starts with a startling move, a torn-up deal, and then widens into a bigger question. Was that walkaway a short-sighted gamble or a smart pause? And can China and Turkey repair the relationship to build a corridor that actually works? Next, we'll zoom out and look at what Turkey was trying to build in the first place, the size of its ambitions, what it already achieved, and why upgrading rails matters more than just faster trains. To understand why Turkey's railway project is such a big deal, we have to look at the country's geography and ambitions. Turkey sits at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, a natural bridge between East and West. For centuries, goods, ideas, and armies have passed through this land. In modern times, that same position makes Turkey a potential transit powerhouse for global trade. But for a long time, its railway system hasn't lived up to that potential. Much of Turkey's rail network was built in the early 20th century, with aging infrastructure, uneven electrification, and outdated signaling systems. Many trains were still running at speeds that would make passengers in Japan or China laugh. The system worked, but it wasn't efficient enough for a country that wants to be a regional hub. That's why, in 2014, Turkey made a big leap forward, opening its first high-speed rail line between Ankara and Istanbul. What used to be a 4-hour-plus trip was suddenly cut almost in half. It was a proud moment, sleek new trains, faster travel, and proof that Turkey could modernize its transportation network. But that was just the beginning. By 2018, Ankara had announced an ambitious national railway modernization plan worth around $35 billion. The goal wasn't just about convenience for passengers. It was about transforming logistics, boosting tourism, and cutting carbon emissions through electrified lines. Turkey wanted to weave its economy more tightly into both European and Asian supply chains. Think of it like rewiring an entire country's nervous system: new tracks, modern stations, smarter signaling, and more efficient energy use, all working together to move people and goods faster. But a plan that big needs serious partners, countries with money, experience, and technology. And at that moment, no one had more of all three than China, the global leader in high-speed rail. So Turkey's modernization dream opened the door for Chinese cooperation. But as we'll see next, what China brought to the table wasn't just trains. It was a complete package: technology, finance, and a vision for partnership. When Turkey announced its huge railway modernization plan, China saw an opportunity it couldn't ignore. After all, no country on Earth had built high-speed rail as fast or as wide as China. In just a few decades, it had connected most of its major cities with sleek bullet trains running at 300 kilometers per hour or more. So when Turkey invited bids for its new rail network, Chinese companies came prepared, not just to build trains, but to offer an entire ecosystem. China's proposal wasn't a simple "we'll build it for you" deal. It was a full-scale partnership plan. First, Chinese engineers promised to handle Turkey's most difficult terrains, the mountains, tunnels, and valleys that make construction challenging. They offered advanced tunneling techniques like shield boring machines, the same kind used in projects under the Himalayas and beneath massive Chinese cities. Next, they proposed a nationwide electrification upgrade, replacing diesel-powered systems with clean, efficient electric ones. This move would slash fuel costs and emissions while improving reliability. They also suggested adding smart digital control systems powered by 5G and big data that could monitor train speeds, track conditions, and maintenance needs in real time. It was an ambitious, futuristic vision, a connected, intelligent railway that could predict and prevent problems before they happened. But China didn't stop there. To make the deal more appealing politically, it promised to involve Turkish companies directly. The plan included joint ventures, for example, setting up local factories in Ankara to produce metro cars and rail components. China even offered to transfer certain manufacturing technologies, like advanced articulated bogie systems that allow trains to handle sharp curves with ease. This would help Turkey not only modernize its railways, but also build its own railway industry in the process. On paper, it looked like a win-win. Turkey would get world-class infrastructure, jobs, and technology, while China would expand its influence and secure another success story for the Belt and Road Initiative. Everything seemed set. Negotiations advanced through multiple rounds, and both sides were optimistic. But as the talks went deeper, hidden fault lines began to appear, especially around two sensitive issues: money and technology ownership. That's where the dream started to derail. At first, the talks between Turkey and China looked promising, two fast-growing economies, both with big ambitions and something valuable to offer the other. But as negotiations moved into the fine print, things got complicated. What began as a partnership of vision turned into a tug-of-war over control, money, and trust. Turkey came to the table with big demands. It didn't just want to buy trains or hire contractors, it wanted to own the knowledge behind them. Ankara asked for a mixed loan package of around 8 billion euros, including about 1.5 billion in concessional loans, the kind of low-interest financing that China typically reserves for developing countries within its Belt and Road Initiative. But the bigger sticking point was Turkey's insistence on a high level of localization, requiring that at least 60% of the materials, components, and labor be sourced from within Turkey. And that wasn't all. Turkey wanted core technology transfer, not just assembly know-how, but the deep engineering blueprints behind high-speed rail systems. That included advanced signaling, traction, and control software, the brain of the network. In essence, Turkey wanted to ensure that after the project, it could maintain and even expand its railways without relying too heavily on foreign expertise. From Turkey's perspective, this was about sovereignty and self-reliance. It wanted to strengthen its domestic industry, create local jobs, and reduce long-term dependency. But for China, these demands crossed a line. Transferring core technology meant potentially giving away intellectual property it had spent decades developing and protecting, and the high localization ratio meant Chinese companies would lose much of the project's financial value and control. Then came the issue of trust. Negotiations dragged on through more than 10 rounds, and both sides began to feel uneasy. Chinese officials started to question whether Turkey was using their proposal as leverage against European competitors. Turkish negotiators, on the other hand, worried that China's loans might come with hidden conditions or too much influence. In the end, neither side blinked, and the deal quietly fell apart. There was no dramatic press conference or public blame. Just silence, followed by a new announcement. Turkey had chosen Germany's Siemens and a group of European partners instead. But as it turned out, switching to Europe didn't solve Turkey's problems. In fact, it introduced a new set of challenges: technical mismatches, costly redesigns, and financial delays. When Turkey turned away from China and handed its high-speed rail project to Germany's Siemens and other European partners, it really looked like a safe, logical choice. Europe was closer, already a major trade ally, and Siemens had a solid reputation in railway technology. From the sleek Velaro trains running in Spain to the advanced signaling systems across Germany, on paper, the European plan promised modernity, reliability, and smoother cooperation under shared political values. But as soon as work began, cracks started to appear, and not just in the metaphorical sense. One of the biggest challenges was technical incompatibility. Turkey's railway infrastructure had developed in a patchwork way over decades. Some parts were built with old Soviet-era standards, others followed local modifications. The problem? European systems were designed to meet European norms, down to the last millimeter of track gauge, the voltage tolerances in power systems, and the electromagnetic environment of signaling equipment. This mismatch caused constant headaches. For example, Turkey's power grid had wider voltage fluctuations than what Siemens's train control systems were built to handle. The result? The European equipment failed Turkey's national TSE electromagnetic compatibility tests, forcing Siemens engineers to redesign and rework their systems from scratch. That delay alone pushed the signal debugging process back by 8 months. Then came the financial strain. The Turkish lira was losing value, inflation was rising, and government budgets were tightening. The Turkish State Railways, or TCDD, struggled to keep up with scheduled payments. In one major case, the Izmir-Manisa Railway Electrification Project, construction was suspended for over a year because Turkey simply couldn't make interim payments. These repeated setbacks turned the once-celebrated partnership into a frustrating slog. What was supposed to symbolize Turkey's modernization started to look like just another stalled mega-project. The shiny image of European efficiency faded behind delays, redesigns, and budget overruns. By this point, Turkey had learned 2 hard lessons. First, that European standards weren't always compatible with its existing infrastructure. And second, that Western financing came with strict conditions and little flexibility during economic turbulence. So, facing both technical and financial pressure, Ankara began looking east again. China, despite the earlier fallout, still had the money, experience, and willingness to take on complex projects, especially those that fit into the Belt and Road Initiative. And this time, Turkey wasn't just thinking about high-speed passenger trains. It had a much bigger vision, one that stretched beyond its borders, linking Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. When Turkey reached back out to China, it wasn't simply about finishing an old project. It was about redefining its place on the global map. This new round of talks centered on something much bigger: the Middle Corridor, also known as the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route. Picture the world's trade routes as 3 great arteries connecting Asia and Europe. The northern route runs through Russia, the southern route passes through the Suez Canal, and in between them lies the Middle Corridor, a shorter, more direct line running from China through Central Asia, across the Caspian Sea, the Caucasus, and finally Turkey, before reaching Europe. For Turkey, this corridor isn't just a railway, it's a strategic lifeline. It can turn the country into the beating heart of East-West trade. Ships from China could unload containers in Kazakhstan, trains could cross the Caspian, and freight could speed through Turkey straight into Europe, all without touching Russian or Middle Eastern routes. And the timing couldn't be more critical. The Russia-Ukraine conflict disrupted the northern corridor, and global shipping bottlenecks exposed the fragility of the Suez route. Suddenly, the world needed a reliable third path, and Turkey was perfectly positioned to offer it. The Middle Corridor already moves millions of tons of cargo each year, but its full potential remains untapped. By 2025, Turkey expects the number of container trains using the route to more than double, cutting average delivery times from over a month to just 2 weeks. But to handle that growth, Turkey's rail system needs massive upgrades: faster trains, modern logistics hubs, and full electrification of lines, especially the 1,000-kilometer stretch between Iran and Turkey. That's where China comes back in. This time, Ankara isn't asking for passenger trains or showpiece projects. It wants high-speed freight lines, built to Chinese standards, linking Istanbul to Bulgaria and beyond. The goal is clear: to create a seamless technological and logistical link with the China-Europe Railway Express, effectively completing the Belt and Road network from the Pacific to the Mediterranean. For China, this isn't just another overseas contract. It's a strategic move to expand its trade corridors into Europe through a partner that controls key gateways to the EU, the Middle East, and North Africa. For Turkey, it's a lifeline, a chance to attract foreign investment, reduce debt pressure, and solidify its role as the indispensable bridge between continents. But of course, big opportunities come with big challenges. Even as both sides express interest, deep questions remain. Can China and Turkey truly rebuild trust after their earlier fallout? Can Turkey afford large-scale infrastructure under its current economic strain? And will technical standards finally align or clash again like before? Those questions lead us to the final part of our story, where we look at the three key obstacles standing between vision and reality: trust, finance, and technical coordination. Turkey and China may be talking again, but rebuilding a partnership isn't as simple as shaking hands. This time, both sides are moving carefully. The new middle corridor vision is powerful, but before a single train runs on those shiny new tracks, three huge barriers need to be cleared: trust, finance, and technical coordination. Let's start with trust, the hardest one to rebuild. When Turkey walked away from the first deal, it left a deep mark. From China's perspective, it looked like a last-minute betrayal. Years of talks ended abruptly, and Beijing lost confidence in Ankara's reliability. From Turkey's point of view, it was just pragmatic. It wanted better terms, and Europe seemed safer at the time. But international partnerships, especially ones involving billions of dollars and decades of work, run on more than blueprints. They run on credibility. To fix this, Turkey will need to prove it's serious this time. That could mean agreeing to binding project guarantees, clearer repayment terms, and phased milestones so both sides share accountability. On China's side, showing flexibility, maybe through joint management or localized training programs, could help ease old worries about control and influence. Next is finance, the lifeblood of any mega project. Turkey's economy is under pressure. Inflation is still high, the lira has been volatile, and the country's external debt now equals over half of its GDP. That means large loans, especially in foreign currency, are politically sensitive and economically risky. China has the financial muscle through its policy banks, but it's also learned hard lessons from other Belt and Road projects where borrowers struggled to pay. So this time, a hybrid funding model might be the key, combining Chinese loans, Turkish investment, and possibly backing from multilateral lenders like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. That kind of shared structure could spread the risk and make the project more sustainable long-term. Finally, there's technical coordination, the hidden giant. Building high-speed freight lines that connect seamlessly from China's network into Europe isn't just about laying tracks. It's about standards, how power systems, communication networks, and signaling technologies talk to each other. Right now, China and Turkey use different systems. If the two rush into construction without careful integration, they risk facing the same compatibility nightmares that slowed down Turkey's European projects. The solution? Start small. Run pilot routes using dual standard systems. Invest in local R&D centers where Turkish and Chinese engineers can co-develop solutions, and gradually harmonize standards before scaling up. It's slower, but much smarter. If these three pillars, trust, finance, and technology, are handled carefully, the middle corridor could transform from dream to reality. It could make Turkey the beating heart of Eurasian logistics and give China a faster, safer route to Europe. But if any one of these pillars fails, the project could stall before the first locomotive ever leaves the station. So, as both sides eye cooperation once again, the question isn't just, can they do it? It's, will they do it right this time? When you look at the story of Turkey and China's railway partnership, it feels like a full circle, a deal almost done, then lost, and now possibly reborn under new circumstances. But this isn't just about trains or even about trade. It's about how nations balance ambition, pride, and pragmatism in a world that's constantly shifting. Turkey wants to stand tall, a self-reliant power connecting Asia and Europe. China wants to keep its Belt and Road Initiative alive and evolving, proving it can adapt to the world's new economic and political realities. Between them lies a shared opportunity to turn geography into prosperity. If this second chance works, it could mark the start of a new Eurasian era, where freight moves from Xi'an to Istanbul in under 2 weeks, and where Turkey earns billions in transit revenue while local industries grow around new logistics hubs. It could also prove that global infrastructure doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, that East and West can build together rather than compete endlessly. But the flip side is just as real. If old habits return, mistrust, overpromising, hidden conditions, or poor technical planning, the Middle Corridor could become just another what-if project, buried under layers of paperwork and politics. In many ways, this story mirrors the global moment we're living in. The world is splitting into competing trade systems, yet countries like Turkey sit right in the middle, not fully east, not fully west, but uniquely positioned to bridge both. That's a powerful place to be, if managed wisely. So, can China and Turkey really build the future together? The answer depends on whether they've both learned from the past. That speed means nothing without trust, money means little without fairness, and technology means less without true cooperation. Because in the end, the success of the Middle Corridor won't just be measured in kilometers of track or tons of freight. It'll be measured by whether two ambitious nations can build a partnership strong enough to carry more than just trains but a shared vision of progress.